Few ships can claim to have had such a glorious career, rising to the challenges put before it and playing an instrumental role in helping the US Navy modernize to meet the challenges of 20th century naval.
Again, showing the design of the Nevada was ahead of its time.
The enemy simply could not sink. If surviving one nuclear attack was not enough,
all but unsinkable, that honor has to be placed on the Nevada.
Chapter number 1. So let's go ahead and look down at verse number 18 to start off this evening. 1 Timothy 1, verse 18. What we're going to read here is where it's similar to the book of Proverbs, like we saw this morning, where it's a bit of a compare and contrast. How in one verse it says, do this, and on the contrast, or the consequence of not doing that, the opposite is this. So let's go ahead and start in verse 18. This is Paul writing to a young preacher named Timothy. He says, "This charge I commit unto thee, son Timothy, according to the prophecies which went before on thee, that thou by them mightest war a good warfare." So he tells him, war a good warfare in this Christian life. And then notice what he says in verse 19, "Holding faith and a good conscience, which some having put away," saying those who have not done this, those who have put that away, here's what has happened to those people, which some having put away concerning faith have made shipwreck. So notice here that he's not just talking about, of course we've all heard the analogy of how we're in a spiritual battle. The Bible uses it a lot. We're in a spiritual war right now. And he tells them to war good warfare, but the consequence of not doing so is he says you're going to shipwreck yourself, like these certain people have. So essentially, spiritually this evening, you are in a naval battle. You are a ship, and you either have the option, you either war a good warfare, or if you cannot figure out how to do that, you're going to sink. You're going to sink. This is the comparison he gives here. So this evening, just to kind of help help these biblical truths sink in, I want to tell you the story of a ship this evening. I'm going to tell you a story of a ship called the USS Nevada, which is known as one of the most famous stories in U.S. naval history. And we'll see if we can't learn some biblical truths from it this evening. The USS Nevada, just as a synopsis, it's in the U.S. Navy for 30 years, from 1916 to 1946. It was built with one other ship of the same design, and both were considered a Nevada-class battleship. Over her lifespan, this ship would earn the nicknames Old Imperishable and the ship that would not sink. So in light of that, this evening, the title of the sermon is The Nevada-Class Christian. And we're going to look at this evening how to live an unsinkable Christian life. How to live a Christian life that will not sink. Go ahead and turn to Ephesians 4. Ephesians chapter 4. So let's just start off the story. We'll just kind of walk through this story this evening and see if we can't pick up some biblical truths from it. The story actually doesn't start in America, and it doesn't start in modern day. Our story starts at the beginning of the 20th century in Great Britain.
It's difficult for the modern mind to truly fathom just how profound an impact the Industrial Revolution had on the world at large. In military circles, and especially the world's navies, it resulted in a modernization program so rapid that often new designs were authorized for construction that incorporated all the latest advancements, only to be rendered obsolete by even newer advancements by the time they entered service. In 1870, sail was still the primary means of propulsion, with a few warships being fitted with rudimentary steam engines to power them in and out of port, regardless of wind direction, which often hampered all sail vessels if the wind was not favorable for departure. However, by 1900, the few sailing ships left were either the exception or were being converted to or replaced by all steam power. Steam-powered ships were faster and more maneuverable on the water, both huge advantages to a warship, but a warship also needed to be armed to destroy enemy ships and armored to prevent an enemy from sinking it. As the sails went, so too did the banks of cannons, which were replaced by fewer but much larger and more powerful guns, mounted in turrets and aimed using more advanced targeting sights. Experiments in how to mount these weapons led to some quirky gun arrangements and mixtures of armament sizes, both of which proved almost wholly ineffective. Then, in 1906, the British Royal Navy introduced a warship that would set the standard for all battleships to come. The moment HMS Dreadnought was commissioned into service, it was so revolutionary that it rendered all other capital ships obsolete. Dreadnought adopted an all-big gun approach to firepower, mounted in rotating turrets, all but one of which could be trained to either side of the ship, depending on the target's location. The ship also adopted more advanced targeting devices and was encased in very heavy armor along the hull and turrets. None of these innovations were themselves entirely new, but Dreadnought incorporated these advancements and many more in a single hull for the first time. Navies around the world quickly scrambled to get their own ships equivalent to Dreadnought into service, sparking a new arms race to produce what we now call the Dreadnoughts in honor of the first ship.
Now, the fact that Great Britain won this arms race, this infuriated the U.S. government. There was many people, especially in the Navy and Naval Command, infuriated that they didn't come up with this ship first. So what they decided to do was to make a far more revolutionary warship. They were going to make one that was even way more advanced, that made this dreadnought look like a wooden raft. So in 1911, Congress would authorize the ship to be built for just under $6 million. Just as a side note, 1911 would have spent $6 million on a battleship. Today, a single turret on a Coast Guard ship cost about $7 million. So just to kind of put that in perspective, Wikipedia says this: USS Nevada was the lead ship of the two Nevada-class battleships. Launched in 1914, Nevada was a leap forward in dreadnought technology. 4 of her new features would be included on almost every subsequent U.S. battleship: triple gun turrets, oil in the place of coal for fuel, geared steam turbines for greater range, and the all-or-nothing armor principle. So by the time this ship entered service in 1916, it was hailed as a technological masterpiece. Newspapers referred to it as a super dreadnought and the greatest battleship afloat. So, say, what can we learn so far? What can we learn from that? There in Ephesians 4, the first thing, and I brought something to explain what this is, but the first point this is Nevada-class Christian will have all or nothing armor. You say, what in the world is all or nothing armor?
Battleships functioned on 3 basic principles: mobility, firepower, and protection. However, often one of these principles had to be sacrificed to improve the other 2, and in battleships, that often meant agility. The general thinking was that while these heavily armed and protected warships were relatively slow and clumsy to handle, they could dish out enough firepower to sink an enemy warship before sustaining enough hits to threaten it with sinking. Nevertheless, naval engineers worked tirelessly to get around these problems, coming up with innovative solutions, but for every solution to one problem, new problems arose. Given the increasing range and striking power of high explosive and armor-piercing shells, it was soon realized that while traditional thinking emphasized heavy armor on the vertical sides of the ship, the higher trajectories of these new shells meant that it was just as likely that the ship could be hit on top of the main hull, where protection was relatively light.
Brought an example here to demonstrate this. So it used to be when ships were made out of wood and had cannons that when you attacked, when 2 ships fought each other, I have a model here of a battleship. It used to be that when 2 ships attacked each other, that your incoming fire was attacking you on the hull of your ship. That was the part that had to be the thickest, that had to be able to withstand fire, because when you had cannons, ships were at close range, and that was where your fire was coming from. Well, the problem is, as now the cannons are obsolete, and now you have turrets. Battleships like this would fight each other from sometimes 20 miles away, meaning that your fire was now coming not on the sides of the ship, but striking you from on top. So and another problem is that you say, well, why wouldn't they just armor the entire ship? Well, if engineers armored the entire ship, every surface, with 12-inch thick armor, the ship would be too slow to even fight. So what the all or nothing armor principle was, and we're going to see how this applies to us as Christians this evening, is it operated on two principles. One, it provided protection on the parts of the ship they knew were prone to incoming attack, which in this case, the deck, the bridge, the weapons. Incoming fire could pierce through the deck and detonate the explosives inside. And the second concept was they provided protection on the most important parts of the ship. So the bunkers where people slept, that part wasn't armored. However, the bridge where the ship was controlled, the engine rooms, the magazine where the ammunition was stored, this were the parts they identified that were most important, and those are what they protected. There in Ephesians 4, let's look at verse 17. The Bible says this, "This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that ye henceforth walk not as other Gentiles." So he's saying, don't be like the Gentiles, because here's what they do, who walk in the vanity of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over unto lasciviousness, to work all uncleanness with greediness, but ye have not so learned Christ. So what he's saying here is he says, don't be like the Gentiles, because what the Gentiles do is they just walk in vanity. What's vanity? Vanity is things that don't matter. They're just walking. They've just given themselves over to sin. They've just given themselves over to lasciviousness. They're not protecting themselves against anything. They're just kind of walking through this, looking after whatever vanity they find. Look at verse 27, though. Here's what he says, don't be like this, though. He says, ye have not so learned, verse 27, neither give place to the devil. See, here's the comparison there he's making. He says the Gentiles, they're sailing around in the high seas with no armor at all. They're not armoring themselves. They're not protecting themselves from the devil or from sin or from vanity. They're just sailing around with no armor at all. He says, on the other hand, he says, you need to be armored. You can't give place to the devil. The devil's attacking you. You can't have any important spot that's not covered with armor. So when it comes to us this evening, you don't have to turn there, but 2 Corinthians 2:11 says this, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. You see, Satan, if you're not being attacked by Satan right now, I can promise you he's planning an attack. He's planning an attack, he's staging an attack, and he's not just going to attack at a random spot. He's planning his attack on you. Satan knows your weak points. He knows where to attack you. So my question to you this evening is, are you armored where you're prone to attack? Even naval engineers figured out that they needed to armor the spots of the ship that they knew were going to come under attack. They knew they had to prioritize parts that not only were most important to the function of the ship, but they had to protect parts that they knew they were going to be hit by. They weren't protecting the bottom of the ship as much as they were protecting the top. So go ahead and turn to Ephesians chapter 6. This model, by the way, I wanted to get a model of the Nevada, but the Nevada is such a famous ship that the model's become a collector's item, so I wasn't even able to find a model of it for like under $400. So I got this one for $20 on Amazon instead. So there in Ephesians chapter 6, let's start reading in verse number 10. Let's see what the Bible says about this idea of armor. And as we're reading this, I want you to focus on it, because we read these verses so many times, I think we can kind of forget their meaning. But let's look at verse 10. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God. Why? That ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. So when the devil attacks, because he's going to attack, you need to be armored so you can stand against the wiles of the devil. Verse 12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in places. So what do we do about that? Verse 13, wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, he says again, stand therefore, your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Verse 16, above all taking the shield of faith, where ye may be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Notice all of these things but one are defenses against Satan attacks. The priority is on how you're going to be attacked. You're going to be defending against the wiles of the devil, and you need to protect yourself in certain areas of your life to when the inevitable attack of Satan happens, you don't just sink like a rock to the bottom of the ocean. You need to be protected so that you can withstand the fiery darts of Satan. So let's think about this. There are serious attacks coming in your life. So, and we're all different. None of us are perfect, and we all have different areas, different points. So let me ask you this. When Satan attacks your life, whenever that is, where would he attack you? Where are you prone to attack? Where's your weak points? Where's your engine room that is just wide open, is my question. We need to identify those points and protect them, because that's what they did here. They figured out where they were attacked, and they said, this is the spot. We can't put armor, we can't coat the whole thing perfectly in armor, but this needs to have priority. The weak point must be armored. Proverbs 26:11 says this, as a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. You see, Satan is going to attack you where he knows you're prone to take on water. He's not going to attack you in the areas that you have well established. He's not going to attack you in the areas that you have drilled down. He's going to hit you on your weakest link. Verse 12 of Proverbs 26 says, in contrast to that, it says, seest thou a wise man in his own conceit? There's more hope of a fool than of him. So look, be careful just sailing around thinking that it can never happen to me. Be careful being wise in your own conceit. I'm fine. I'm not. I can. You need to realize that we all have weak points, and that's what we need to cover with armor. 1 Corinthians 10:12 says this, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. We need to watch out for the wiles of the devil and armor ourselves against it. So that's the first aspect, right? Realize where Satan may attack you, and that's what you need to take care of. Realize your weak points, armor yourself there. We get that. But remember, the other concept of all or nothing armor was they identified not just where they were most likely to be attacked, but they identified where they could not be attacked at all. Where the areas of the ship where even if they were attacked, the bridge, the magazine, if they were hit there, they were done for.
The armor had been spread out along the length of the hull, with the heaviest armor logically concentrated around the most important areas, such as the machinery and armaments. The rest of the ship received thin to medium armor. The new American concept dispensed with the thin to medium armor altogether, and used the weight that was saved to better protect the horizontal surfaces of key areas from long-range enemy shells raining down from above.
So, in the same way, we need to, because remember what Jesus said to the Pharisees. I don't have it written down, but he told them, he said, you strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. He said, you have all these little things, these tiny little standards all nailed down, which there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that if you sit here and you cover the areas of your life that don't really matter as much, but you omit the weightier matters of the law, you're going to be in trouble. The areas, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the priorities that the Bible emphasizes on our Christian life. I'm talking about the engine room of your prayer life. Look, don't you need to have armor there. Church, you need to have that. You need to be going to a good church. You need to have that. You need to put armor there because that's critical. That's important. Bible reading, that needs to be, that you need to coat that with armor. Don't give Satan. You can't suffer because when Satan attacks you, if he can take down one of those main building blocks of your Christian life, you're going to sink. We're going to talk about a ship that was at Pearl Harbor in a little bit, and a ship in the Arizona. The Arizona took a armor-piercing shell through its deck, and it hit the magazine where the ammunition was stored, and it ripped the ship in half, and it sunk. You can't take an attack to certain areas of your life. We need to coat those things. Soul winning, that's important. That keeps us in the Christian life. That's our purpose. That's like a ship having no weapons. That's what we're here to do. We can't let Satan take that from us. We need to identify these areas that are prone to attack and that are critical to our Christian life. And we need to make sure that we are attentive to armoring those. let's go ahead and turn. First, let's just continue our story. So the first thing, the Nevada-class Christian will have all or nothing armor. Let's continue our story here and see what we can learn. So, as World War II began in Europe, this is after the Nevada went through World War I, of course, all the time between the World Wars. But as World War II began, the United States placed the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The idea was Japan was threatening our territories in the Pacific, so the idea was, if this sounds familiar to today, that if we sanction them and move our forces closer to them, they will back off. That was the idea. In the attack, the idea of an attack on Pearl Harbor, that was not expected, because surely if they were going to attack, they would just attack next door in the Philippines or in our territories there. It wasn't expected that they'd come all the way across the world and attack us at home, depending on who you ask. But so on December 7th, the Nevada found itself moored at Pearl Harbor directly behind the USS Arizona.
On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the USS Nevada was tied up on its starboard or right side at Key F8 behind the battleship USS Arizona.
A man named Ensign Joseph Tossig was the commanding officer on deck, and he was watching the flag being raised with the band playing the Star-Spangled Banner.
Being in command of the ceremony for the first time, Tausig found he wasn't sure what size the flag should be hoisted. With only minutes left before the ceremony was to begin, he sent a sailor to their neighboring ship, the Arizona, to ask an officer there which he should use. While the band waited patiently for the sailor to return, ominous specks began to appear in the sky. But being moored in a major naval facility, they assumed they were American planes undertaking training. They were not. After the sailor returned from the Arizona with the answer for Tausig, the band began playing and the flag was hoisted just as the first Japanese bombs and torpedoes began to rain down on the American ships. The attack was so sudden that the band continued playing and the flag was still being hoisted as explosions rang out. One Japanese torpedo plane flew low and fast over the rear of the Nevada. But had any of the assembled sailors had time to examine it, they would have seen it was no longer clutching a torpedo. A gunner on the Japanese plane tried to machine gun the band members, but missed, although he put several holes in the ship's flag. Suddenly, the torpedo that had been unleashed by the Japanese plane slammed into the Arizona, which was lifted out of the water by the blast before settling in, and then proceeding to sink to the bottom of the harbor.
Joseph Tausig set the alarm and said into the intercom microphone, "All hands, general quarters, air raid, this is no drill." The ship's bugler, who was apparently intent on following procedure, stepped in between Tausig and the microphone to play the bugle. But given the circumstances, Tausig grabbed the bugle and threw it into the harbor. Moments later, Tausig would be struck through the leg from incoming fire, but refused to back down from his station, for which he would later receive the Navy Cross. He later had his leg amputated, but returned to service 3 days later. It's interesting to think about people have a headache and then they can't go into work. Now, the most amazing thing about the Nevada at Pearl Harbor is typically it took a battleship about 2 hours and the use of 4 tugboats to pull it away from the berth and get it going on its own power until the turbines could gain steam and things like that. But the Nevada's crew, due to a bunch of mini acts of bravery we don't have time to get into, the Nevada's crew managed to get the ship underway in less than 30 minutes on its own power. So very, very unique. The Nevada made a break for the ocean. Its crew was firing at incoming aircraft, rescuing other sailors, all the while being riddled with bullets, struck by multiple bombs, damaged from the explosions of other ships, on fire, and with an 18 by 24-foot hole in her side from a torpedo. Badly damaged, the commanding officer gave the order to run it aground in shallow waters to keep her from being sunk in deep water. The ship's crew would later receive more medals of honor and Navy crosses that day than any other ship in Navy history due to its bravery. So you say, okay, that's interesting, but how does that apply to us? Well, one reason, there's a lot of factors that allowed Nevada to get underway so quickly, but one of the reasons that the ship was able to get away and others were not is because it's kind of a funny story, but Ensign Joseph Tausig, the man who is the commanding officer on deck, he didn't like the engineer on board. They got in arguments a lot, and Back when he was in Naval Academy, he made fun of him. So the night before, in the middle of the night, just to annoy the engineer, he had him and his crew start up the ship's second boiler, just to annoy him. Now, typically a ship had one always running, just to kind of keep the auxiliary functions of the ship on board. But he had this second boiler unnecessarily lit, just for no reason at all. So you say, how does that apply to us? Well, you need, as a Christian, even if you're not under attack right now, even if you're just, figuratively speaking, moored in the harbor waiting the next attack, you need to have your second boiler lit. You need to be ready for Satan's attacks. Because here's what we want to do. We're under attack from the devil, and when we're actively under siege by the devil and we're going through a trial in our life, then we're alert. Then we're at our stations, then we're in full alert, but then the attack kind of goes away and life returns to normal and we totally drop anchor. We'll just sit there and maybe we let things slip. Maybe we let our Bible reading slip. Maybe we let our prayer life slip. Maybe we're just kind of running on minimum power. But even in those times in your life, you need to still keep your ship running at full power. You need to be operating at full spiritual power. You can't let your guard down because the attack, like I said, it's coming eventually. Turn to Matthew 24. Matthew 24. You can't let your guard down for a single minute. You don't have to turn there, but 1 Peter 5:8 says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil is a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. But the God of all grace, who hath called us into his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after that ye have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strength, settle you. And there in Matthew 24, let's start at verse 42. Here Jesus gives an example here. He says, watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. Verse 43, but know this, that if the good man of the house, so here he gives an example and we read this and we're like, yeah, duh, obviously, but we make this mistake all the time. Verse 43, but know this, that if the good man of the house would have known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. He's saying if someone was going to break into a house, if the owner knew what time they were coming, he would have watched for them and obviously it wouldn't have happened. If you knew that your car was going to be broken into at a certain time, you'd be there, you'd be watching, and it wouldn't happen. And we read this, oh, of course, obviously. But we do the same thing. What happens is when the thief goes out of sight, we let our guard down, oftentimes, in our spiritual life. As soon as the immediate threat is gone, we just sit and we let everything we just run on our very minimum power as possible. We run on just enough power to come up to church the next day. Just enough power. We need to be at full power all the time. We are always in a situation where we are constantly under the threat of attack by the devil in this spiritual battle. We cannot let our guard down. Verse 44, Jesus says this, therefore, for that reason, because of the fact that trouble will come at unprecedented times, because of the fact you're in a spiritual battle, because of the fact that the thief is coming, be ye also ready. He said, in this same way, you need to be ready right now. And this is at a time when Jesus is preparing the disciples for a time that was to come, a difficult time that was to come. And what ended up happening? The disciples, when Jesus was arrested, when trouble came, the persecution came, they weren't ready. They weren't watching, and they all fled. They all forsook Jesus and fled. We don't want to be like that. We need to have our second boiler always lit. We need to be constantly watching and aware for incoming attacks by the devil. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. Verse 45, who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. We want God to look at our lives, and He doesn't want to find us just sitting and just relaxing in a lawn chair waiting for the next attack. He wants us to be so doing. He wants us to be on high alert. He wants us to have our spiritual life at the max all the time. That's how it should be. It's how it should be. Instead of our attack comes in our life, and then we try to get everything going, and then we start praying, and then we start reading our Bible, and then we start doing what we should have been doing the whole time. Turn to Proverbs 22. Proverbs chapter 22. Proverbs chapter number 22, again, hits this idea home. Verse 3, a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. I think it's interesting because most people, if you're in church and, you're listening to the preaching and you're going soul winning, you foresee the evil. But typically what people do is they foresee the evil in the sense that they know the devil's going to attack at some point. They know they're going to go through a difficult time at some point. But no one hides themselves. No one actually prepares for it. No one actually conducts their life in a way today to where when the evil comes tomorrow, they will be ready for it. And they won't just be completely obliterated by the devil, by the fiery darts of the wicked. Verse 4 in Proverbs 22, I don't think this is a coincidence, but it says, by humility and fear of the Lord are riches, honor, and life. So do you want to have life? Do you want to live? Do you want to not sink? Then you need to maintain humility and fear of the Lord. You need to keep that Christian life going all the time at full power. Turn to Nehemiah chapter 4. Nehemiah chapter number 4. Nehemiah chapter 4 is a great example because of the situation Nehemiah was in. Nehemiah 4, let's start reading in verse 15. If you remember, Nehemiah is building the wall around Jerusalem, and he has a lot of enemies because he's doing the work of God. And just like the church, we're doing the right thing. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So there is going to be, it's not a question of if, it's when. There's going to be spiritual attacks. Verse 15 says, and it came to pass, this is our Nehemiah speaking here, when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one to his work. And it came to pass from that time forth. So they have enemies. What does Nehemiah do about it? That half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears, the shields, and the bows, the habergeons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. They which builded on the wall, and they that bare burdens, and those that laded, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held the weapon. For the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. 19, and I said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. In what place ye shall hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us. Our God shall fight for us. So they're in a very dangerous situation here. Imagine if you walked onto a construction site and everyone's sitting there working, doing their own thing, and they have an AR-15 around their back. And the superintendent's walking around with someone next to him with the military on speed dial. That'd be a pretty dangerous situation, but that's what they're doing here. It's so dangerous that they can't even have their weapons set beside them. They need to have them in their hand all the time, just in case the attack happens at that time. This is how we should live our Christian life. Because look, we're doing the same thing. We are, notice what he says. He says the work is great and large. The work we are doing here at Holdfast Baptist Church, it is great in fact that it's important and it's large. It's a big job to do and it's important. And because of that, the devil and his attacks are right outside the door. And while we may not be in an attack all the time, if we're not in an attack, Satan is staging it right now. He's planning it right now. Just like in war. In war, no one ever sends an army just at some random point in the enemy line. There's planning that goes into it. Even the Bible talks about this. If two kings are going to fight, one's going to say, okay, can I meet this many people with this people from this ground with this type of weapons? Am I able to do this? That's what Satan knows that, and that's what he's doing. He's doing that to this church. He's doing that to our life. He's not going to attack at a random point. He is going to attack you at your weakest link. And the attack is coming eventually, and we need to be ready. Verse 21, so we labored in the work. That's great. But also at the same time, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Look, just like Nehemiah, it's a work great and large. Satan's trying to stop the work. And we need to be spiritually prepared. And the result of that is our God will fight for us. It's the same thing. But we need to be prepared. God expects us to be prepared. We think about Nehemiah here. What if the attack came? Was everyone just supposed to go scrambling, running around, looking for their weapon? Oh, where did I place that? No, he wanted them ready all the time. He had someone with the trumpet standing right next to him all the time. This picture here is how we need to live our Christian life. We need to have our boiler always lit. Our ship needs to be ready to go at any time. So we're learning lessons from this ship. The first lesson is the Nevada-class Christian will have all or nothing armor. Second, we'll learn the Nevada-class Christian will always have their second boiler lit. Third, this evening, let's continue our story. So as the war went on, the Nevada would eventually be repaired and return to service in 1943.
Nevada entered the fray again in May of 1943, when it was dispatched to provide fire support for the US operation to expel Japanese troops from Attu Island. After this, the Nevada underwent another stint in port, being fitted with new equipment before transferring to the Atlantic, where, after providing convoy escort against German surface raiders and aircraft, it sailed to the UK in April of 1944 to prepare for the Normandy invasion. On June 6, 1944, Nevada's guns provided fire support for the D-Day landings, as well as acting as Rear Admiral Morton Deo's flagship for the operation. Allied commanders praised the old dreadnought for incredibly accurate fire in support of troops ashore, with shells often being aimed just 600 yards in front of the advancing Allied soldiers. Nevada then headed to the Mediterranean, where it supported the invasion of southern France between August and September of 1944, before returning to the Pacific Theater after receiving new gun barrels.
Turn to Romans 15. At D-Day specifically, and throughout the whole rest of the war, the Nevada would be praised for her shockingly accurate firepower. The Nevada's crew would be able to destroy targets such as tanks, trucks, machine guns, mortars, and guns from sometimes nearly 20 miles away. They had planes here. Again, this isn't the same ship, but these planes would be launched off the ship, and they would fly 20, 30 miles ahead, far beyond where the crew could actually visibly see, and they would send coordinates back to the ship, and the crew would be able to hit those specific targets. Especially aboard that ship, they were extremely good at it. They were very accurate. Another thing that drew attention is that while many times enemy shells would be landing all about the ship, sinking and hitting other ships, but the Nevada would not be hit. Despite being targeted multiple times specifically from enemy fire, the Nevada would not sink. And then in Romans 15:1, what's the third thing we can learn? The third thing is that the Nevada-class Christian will provide support for Christian soldiers. The Nevada-class Christian won't just be all by themselves. They will be existing to not only maintain their spiritual life, but to help others along the way. Romans 15:1, I love this group of verses here. Verse 1, we then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let everyone please his neighbor for his good to edification. And then verse 3, we see the ultimate example of this. For even Christ pleased not himself. But, as it is written, the reproaches of them that reproach thee fell on me. Look, as a strong, unsinkable Christian, talking about how to be a Christian, this was the ship that would not sink. So how can we have an unsinkable Christian life? Well, one way is that we need to focus on assisting other people, not just ourselves. And I love this. I love how it uses Christ as the example here. And I also like the scripture it attributes to Christ. It says, as is written, and then it gives this verse that's attributed talking about Christ. The reproaches of them that reproached thee fell on me. Because that's what Christ did. Christ came here and he took the reproaches that fell on you, and he took them off you, and he took them upon himself. Saying in this same way, this is what you need to do. You need to bear the infirmities of other people. Turn to Romans 12. Romans chapter 12, verse 10. Romans 12:10 says this, "Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, and honor," notice this, "preferring one another. Not slothful in business." It gives us some practical examples of that. "Fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer." These are a lot of the things we've just talked about, right? Continuing instant in prayer, maintaining those parts of your Christian life and armoring them and not letting Satan take them from you. "Distributing to the necessity of saints, given hospitality. Bless them which persecute you, bless, curse not." In verse 15, "Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep." Look, a mature Christian won't just have to be so busy with bailing water out of their own ship that they're too busy to assist anybody else. Because that's why people do it, right? People who, obviously it's selfish, right? I mean, someone who won't help other people, or they're not existing to assist others. Obviously it's just selfishness, right? They're just focused on themselves. But I think the reason a lot of people don't try to help other people and be there for other people, I think many times is not just selfishness, but they're too busy bailing water out of their own ship. They don't have they can barely, they're sitting there flex sealing their boat, right? They're sitting there trying to hold their ship together. They can't help anybody else. So look, that should be motivation for us, because one reason that you need to be armored and you need to be strong is so that you can support other people who are going through the same. Because look, you're not a lone ship here. We're all in one fleet. We're all here in one fleet. We're all here to support each other, and you should exist to help the other team. You should exist to help the other people. Turn to Galatians 6:1. And that's one of those lines that defines, a babe in Christ to a mature Christian, is someone who they've not only figured out how to hold their own life in one shape, but now they're moving on to helping other people. Now they're being there for other people. They're sharing others' emotions. If someone's going through a hard time, they're weeping with them. If someone's rejoicing, they're rejoicing with them. They're happy for others when they succeed, and they're sad for them when they are in trouble. Galatians 6:1 says this, "Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault," notice that what he says here. He says, "Ye which are spiritual." He's saying if you're spiritual, if you are a mature Christian, here's what you will do. "Restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted." Verse 2, "Bear ye one another's burdens." And notice what he says here, "and so fulfill the law of Christ." He says, you want to be like Jesus, you want to be like Christ, you want to be Christ-like, here's one of the best ways you can do it. You can bear other people's burdens, not just your own. And look, that's hard to do because it's twice the load, right? It's one person trying to take on twice the load, 3 times the load. But that, if you want to be like Christ, think about it. Christ took on the load of anyone who's ever lived. Can we take on the load of a few people, of our church, of just a handful of people that we're around every day, our family? Like I said, this fleet, it consists of more people than just ourselves. We ought to strive to help others. So, we're talking about how to live an unsinkable Christian life. One, this evening, we talked about we need to have all or nothing armor. We need to figure out where the devil is going to attack, the most important parts of our life, and we need to protect those. We can't let those slip. Second, we talked about having our second boiler lit, right? Being ready against Satan attacks, not just relaxing and waiting for it to happen. Third, we talked about supporting other Christians, other Christian soldiers. Let's continue our story and see the last thing we can learn this evening. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians 9. So during its time in Europe, the Nevada would end up firing so many shells that the barrels would have to be replaced. They literally became so hot that they started to melt, and the fire was no longer accurate. So she returned to New York, where they would actually be replaced with barrels that were taken from the Arizona, the ship that exploded right in front of her at Pearl Harbor. After this, the ship returned back to the Pacific Fleet, providing firepower for both the Iwo Jima and Okinawa landings. During this time, the ship would take damage, including being directly hit from a kamikaze plane, but still would not sink. So what I want to emphasize here is that the Nevada was used for countless operations, both before and during World War II. during World War I, she was used for protecting convoys. After World War I, she was used for diplomatic purposes. During World War II, the Nevada was mainly used for bombardment support for land invasions, but also was used for convoy protection, carrying troops, carrying supplies and ammunition, and also throughout her lifespan would be used as the flagships for multiple admirals. So the point I want to emphasize here is this was just a battleship. That was their purpose. The purpose of a battleship was bombardment support. It was bombardment support for fleets and for land invasions. But it was used in numerous other ways, in numerous other missions. 1 Corinthians 9, start reading in verse 19. The fourth thing that we can learn this evening is the Nevada-class Christian will serve wherever needed. Will serve wherever needed. Verse 19, for though I be free from all men, this is Paul speaking, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And unto the Jews I became as a Jew. Why? That I may gain the Jews. To them that are under the law as under the law, that I may gain them that are under the law. To them that are without law as without law, being not without law to God, but are under the law to Christ, that I might gain them which are without law. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. And then he kind of sums it up. He says, I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. And this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker thereof with you. Here's what Paul is saying. He's saying, as long as I can just save a few more people, I will become whoever I need to be. I will serve wherever I need to be in whatever capacity, as long as I can save some for the gospel's sake. Turn to Matthew 20. Matthew chapter 20. Romans 12:16, you don't have to turn there, says, be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Look, never be too good for certain people. Never be too good for helping certain people or for doing certain jobs. Matthew 20, we kind of see some people here who have the wrong mentality about this, who didn't really get the idea. Matthew 20:20 says this, then came to him the mother of Zebedee's children with her sons, worshiping him and desiring a certain thing of him. And he said unto her, what wilt thou? She saith unto him, grant that these my two sons may sit, the one on thy right hand and the other on thy left in thy kingdom. But Jesus answered and said, ye know not what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I shall drink of and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They say unto him, we are able. So these two disciples of Jesus come to him and they're like, we want to sit up next to you on in heaven, next to your throne. They're saying, we want the best spot. Can we get the best seat at the table? Can we get, and they're just asking this of him. That's what they want. They want the best spot. They want the best seat. But notice what Jesus says in verse 26. He says, but it shall not be so among you. He's saying, you have the wrong idea. You're not understanding. It's not like this with us. He says, whosoever will be great. He's like, if you want to be great, here's what you need to do. Let him be your minister. He's like, if someone wants to be great, let them serve. Let them minister unto other people. Verse 27, and whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. And then he, again, the ultimate example for us, verse 28, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. Here's what Jesus is telling them. He's saying it's not all about having the top status all the time. He's saying it's not always about having, being the most recognized or the most important to everybody. And look, for these men, it wasn't. I'm sure these men are going to be way more rewarded in heaven than any of us. But their life wasn't this life of recognition and just where everybody was just fawning all over them. Here's what their life was. Matthew 23:33 says this, Jesus talking to the Pharisees, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes. This is the disciples. He's prophesying what would happen to them when they left. And some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them ye shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. Look, he wasn't just talking about the Old Testament prophets. He's saying, he's prophesying what's going to happen to his disciples. He's saying, there's going to be a time when I'm going to send you prophets. I'm going to send you people to preach the gospel, and you're going to kill them, you're going to scourge them, and they're going to die terrible deaths. That's what was in store for them. We don't get to decide in our lives. We don't get to decide what's in store for us. We need to be willing to serve in whatever capacity Christ wants us to. Turn to Isaiah chapter 6. I mean, think about all God's servants in the Bible. Some of them were kings and some were killed. some of them were at the top, and some of them lived. Think about Abraham. Abraham was a very wealthy man. God blessed him in this life. But not everyone's like that. God has different plans for all of us. Isaiah 6:8 says this. Love this verse. Also, I heard the voice of the Lord saying. So notice the question God asks. Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? Then said I, here am I, send me. So notice God didn't give the terms. He didn't say, here's the job description, here's the pay, here's the benefits, he didn't give all the details. He didn't say what you're going to be doing. Here's the training required. God just said, whom can I send? Who will go for me? I just need someone. Someone raised their hand. I just need someone. He didn't tell them. He had a job for these people, but he didn't give it yet. He just said, I just need somebody. And here Isaiah says, here am I, send me. Isaiah didn't ask the terms. He didn't ask what he'd have to do. He didn't ask if I'm going to be rewarded for it. He just said, I'm here, God, whatever you need me to do. And, of course, we see in verse 9, God does explain what he needs him to do. And he said, he didn't have a pleasant message either. And he said, go and tell this people, hear ye indeed, but understand not, and seek ye indeed, but perceive not. Look what he tells Isaiah. Make the heart of this people fat, and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert and be healed. Then said I, Lord, how long? And he answered, until the cities be wasted without inhabitant, and the houses be without man, and the land be utterly desolate. So Isaiah just signs up. He says, God, I'm here. Here am I, send me. And God tells him, he gives him this task. Not a pleasant task. He basically tells him, I want you to preach to them until they either all become reprobates or my judgment comes, whichever comes first. He tells them. He says, you preach until they reject you enough to where they don't even get saved anymore. And until it's fulfilled. That's what Jeremiah did. Jeremiah preached and preached and preached until people either rejected it and were eventually destroyed in the coming judgment. And that's what he told Isaiah, and he didn't ask the terms. He was just glad to serve where he could. Philippians 4:11 says this. You don't have to turn there. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned, this is Paul, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Paul says, I don't care what state I am. I don't care where I'm at. I've just learned, as long as I'm serving Christ, I'm content. Because that's all I really need. I know both how to be abased. I can be humbled. I can be in a humbled spot. And I know how to abound. He's like, I know how to do well. And take that well too. He said, I can do both. Everywhere and in all things, I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and suffer need. And here's how he can do it. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. He said, as long as I'm serving Christ and he is strengthening me, it doesn't matter where I'm at or what I'm doing. And even if you think of 2 Timothy, where Paul was kind of describing his life, he said, he describes all the horrible things that happened to him, but he said, notwithstanding, the Lord stood by me and strengthened me. That's kind of a fulfilled prophecy, because here in Philippians, because I think 2 Timothy was the last book he wrote, here in Philippians, he's saying, I can do, he's like, it's like a prediction, he's saying, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me, and then at the end of his life, he says, yeah, God stood by me, and he strengthened me. He did. And that's how he was able to live the life he did. So we need to have this mentality. Even we may be used to a certain life that we live, but we need to be able to, whatever happens or however things change, whether things get better or more difficult in our Christian life, we need to have the mentality of, you know what, wherever Christ needs me, however I'm serving Christ, I can serve there. And I can be used by God in whatever capacity is his will. So let's just kind of finish off our story here this evening. So finally on September 2nd, 1945, Japan formally surrendered, ending World War II, a war that lasted for 6 years and cost the lives of nearly 60 million people. And what's interesting, just a side note, this ship, actually this one, is called the USS Missouri. It's actually on this ship that the Japanese surrendered. And it's interesting too, and then this is you can't really see it, but this is actually, if you see the ship, this is a plaque that's on the spot where they surrendered. Just kind of interesting there. But if you go to Pearl Harbor today, I'd love to visit sometime, but if you go there, they have the site where the Arizona sunk. It's still there. You can still see it. And right across the harbor from Arizona is that ship. So, just kind of interesting, symbolizing the beginning and end of World War II. You can still tour it and everything. So World War II ends, and the Nevada finished her wartime duty by serving as a transport taking soldiers back. This time, Nevada was evaluated as out of date and no longer needed for service in an active fleet. However, rather than just scrap the ship, it was given one final mission, maybe the most important one they would ever take on, called Operation Crossroads. Operation Crossroads was a test in which the government would test two nuclear weapons on a fleet of old warships to gather more info on the characteristics of nuclear bombs and how they would affect a fleet. Because the question was, okay, now people have nuclear weapons, is a fleet even needed? Well, a fleet, because if a fleet will just sink if it's nuked, then maybe that's why it was called Crossroads, because it was a big deciding time in when it came to this. So Nevada was loaded with scientific instruments, a bunch of different, it was loaded with cans of food, tank, just machine guns, just different things they wanted to test. And it was used as the target ship. So this is where the bomb was to be dropped. It was used as the target for the first attack, codenamed Able. The crew left the deck for the last time, many of whom had spent their whole life on the ship. So just think about it. A lot of these men, they had been on this ship through 2 world wars. They had watched their friends die on this ship. I mean, this was, they had lived on this ship. This was their life. So as the crew left the deck for the last time, one sailor was said to kneel down and kiss the side of the ship, saying as he walked away, "Goodbye, my old friend." So after this, a few hours later, Able was dropped by a B-29 of the 509th Bombardment Group, detonating at about 500 feet above the water.
July 1st, 1946. This was Able Day. Army Air Force camera, observation, and weather and instrument planes prepare to take off. The B-29 and C-54 photographic planes bristle with cameras of every type and description. With almost 500 cameras trained on the blast, the test will be photographed from every possible angle. The bomber is over the target. The bomb is away. And 1 second to go. In the following view, the blast will be seen as was photographed in slow motion. The battleship Nevada, target ship of the array, suffered moderate superstructure damage, and the deck aft was buckled. The paint on one side was scorched, but did not burn.
Ships newer than Nevada from the blast sank, but Nevada would not. Nevada withstood a nuclear bomb. Now the next test, codenamed Baker, would prove to be far, far more destructive because this one would be detonated from underneath the water.
Dr. Titterton at the automatic firing panel board prepares to broadcast the last 15 seconds.
15, 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
Wikipedia says this. The underwater, this is describing the explosion of this bomb. The underwater fireball took the form of a rapidly expanding hot gas bubble that pushed against the water, generating a supersonic hydraulic shockwave which crushed the hulls of nearby ships as it spread out. During the first full second, so this is within 1 second of it detonating, the expanding bubble removed all the water within a 500-foot radius and lifted 2 million tons of spray and sand into the air. As the bubble rose at 2,500 feet per second, it stretched the spray dome into a hollow cylinder or chimney of the spray, 6,000 feet tall and 2,000 feet wide, with walls of water 300 feet thick. This was detonated underneath these ships. As a result, 9 ships were sunk, some of them being completely vaporized by the blast. But the Nevada still would not sink. Having survived 2 nuclear bombs, Nevada was decommissioned from the Navy and towed to Pearl Harbor. Now at this point, Nevada was damaged and extremely radioactive, so Naval Command gave the order to destroy the ship. She was loaded with explosive towed out to the sea, and the explosives were detonated. But the Nevada still would not sink. Shocked by this, the command was given to use the ship as target practice. So they're just trying to get rid of it at this point. It won't sink. They lined the hull with explosives and it would not penetrate it. So for nearly 1 week, for about 5-6 days, Nevada was bombarded by bombers, airplanes, battleships, destroyers, much newer and more advanced in itself, but would not sink. Finally, Nevada was given a final coup de grace, sending an aerial torpedo point blank to the hull, about right there, finally sinking the ship. So, what's the biggest lesson that we can learn from this? What's the best? I mean, this is just it's a cool story. It's a cool story about a ship, but you know, what's the biggest lesson that the analogy we can take from this? Road is Nevada was known as an inspiration to all who knew about its resilience, as it was known as old and perishable, the ship that would not sink. One of its names was actually the Cheer Up ship. It was just kind of known as a positive thing. And the best example of this I thought was interesting was at Pearl Harbor. At Pearl Harbor, I don't want to tip my thing over. I have some pictures here. But at Pearl Harbor, as the ship got underway, because remember, it was the only ship that was able to get underway. Everyone else was just sitting there. Sailors, including many of the wounded, were cheering as Nevada broke loose. One man says he was nearly brought to tears by seeing the sight. I mean, the ship was on fire. Here's a picture of it. This is at Pearl Harbor. This is Nevada right here. It's on fire. It's going through, the harbor was on fire because oil from other ships had filled the water and the water was on fire. It was sailing through this, it was on fire, and the American flag was still there, just tattered from where it was struck through earlier that morning. Some people said that it reminded them of multiple veterans actually said that they were reminded of the Star-Spangled Banner, which of course goes, "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there." There's a poster that came out after Pearl Harbor. I thought it was interesting is this is probably what it looked like. This is probably what they saw. It's a poster, it says, it's a quote from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It says, "We here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. Remember December 7th. But this is probably what they saw. And these people who, they're dying, they're wounded, they're under attack. Something about this sight, I mean, it looks like a terrible sight. I mean, seeing a tattered flag and a ship that's on the, about to sink, you would think that that's a frightening sight. But for some reason, something in them it inspired them. And here's, I think, the greatest lesson that I think we can learn from just this story of something that people just built. Just in the end is just a piece of metal, right? The greatest thing I think we can learn is we're here and we're in this spiritual battle. We're in this war and it's not easy. 99% of people out there who are saved, the 1% of people are saved, and then only 1% of those people are actually probably only serving Christ. Everyone else they're not even in the fight. They're sitting at the bottom of the ocean. They never even fired a shot. They never even tried. And so we're this 1% of the 1%, like pastors mentioned, and we're the ones actually fighting. And it's hard. It's hard. The devil's attacking. We go through spiritual war. Sometimes it seems like everything the devil can muster, he's throwing at us, right? Because we are tearing down his strongholds. We are taking his eternal plans for people, and we're reversing them. We are causing terrible damage to Satan's plan in this city and in the world. And here's the thing, this is the sad sight, but most people, they're like this. They're sinking. They're on fire. They're burning. So here's the inspiration here, and the greatest lesson is, imagine here's why this was so inspiring, because people are on the Arizona. They're on the Carolina. They're on all these other ships that are burning, they're sinking, their friends are dying. And they look at this, and they're like, not everybody's sunk. Imagine the inspiration that you can be in this Christian life where most people are sinking and most people can't do it. Imagine the inspiration you can be to other people if you can stay afloat. If people can look at you and they see you are under attack in your life and you're just being bombarded by Satan, you're under attack in your personal life or, with other people, and they're sitting here and you know what people are thinking? They're thinking, can I do this? Can I get through this? Is this just too hard for me? Have I reached my limit? But when they look and they see other people that, are Christians that will not sink, no matter what they're hit with, no matter what they're struck with, they won't sink. They may take damage. It may not be easy for them, but they stay afloat no matter what. Imagine the inspiration that can be to other people. Imagine how that can inspire everybody, the rest of the fleet, the rest of this church, to keep going in the battle that we all are fighting. Let's bow our heads and have a word.